Welcome, Marco. Hi.
Hello.
Here we are. Yes, we have two parallel sessions. So welcome also to the participant and also to Lenin that will be moderating this session. Thank you, Lenin, for joining.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, Marco.
So just to introduce you, Marco, Lenin. Marco is from Extinction Rebellion and is also a specialist in non-violence. Today, we will talk with Marco about the loss of biodiversity and the problem of biodiversity. So now let's wait 3 minutes before starting, and just the people can join. And when you are ready, like in 5 minutes, you can start. So Lenin, I make you moderator also, so you can also let enter the people.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
So I don't have a camera on this laptop. I'm just gonna be we're using the mic. Is that okay?
No worries, no worries. Just moderate the session.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Okay, so 3 more minutes, and then we
yeah, exactly.
Start.
There were headings for increases of between 3 to 4 Celsius degrees. And then what happened this year?
Okay, let's start. Let's go.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, Marco. So I guess we start now with the people we have. Giancarlo, hello. So it's a loss of biodiversity, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so please go ahead.
Well, I shall start by saying a few words, but I understand that we will be discussing and there will be incoming questions. So it's more like a round table here that we aiming to do. So I'll try and be very brief introducing myself and the point that I want to make here. So my name is Marco Bertaglia. I have been throughout my life, most of all, a researcher in various positions. Most recent with the Joint Research Center, which is the in-house scientific arm of the European Commission, working on agroecology and biodiversity. I'm on unpaid leave from that to become actually fully involved with the global movement Extinction Rebellion, that brings to the forefront the idea that we've been doing many things to try and avoid the catastrophe of the climate crisis and the destruction of biodiversity. Like my colleagues now don't even talk about biodiversity loss anymore. You can see them, you can see that in titles of their very scientific papers on academic journals. They speak about biological annihilation through the sixth mass extinction, ongoing sixth mass extinction. We've been doing international negotiations, march, petitions, all a hell of a lot of a very nice, very good work by many national and international, smaller and larger environmental organizations, and nothing has been enough to avert the disaster we're heading to. And we're heading equally towards a climate disaster as much as we're heading towards an ecological disaster. And the second is less understood, less known maybe. But really, we are in the midst of the 6 months extinction. It's been now a decade or so that scientists have begun publishing key papers highlighting many indications that we are in a 6th mass extinction of our own making. Our own making in the sense that compared to the last previous mass extinction, the one that hit the dinosaurs, the most famous, the meteorite, this time it has human beings. By the way in the way we use land and resources, in the way we use it and open up the biogeochemical cycles and the chains, the trophic chains of beings, we destroy, we predate and extract all we need, or a fraction of the global population actually need. These are the rich countries like the one where I live, using 80 to 90% of all resources on the planet. And then we disrupt the cycles just because we don't stand by, we don't abide by the laws of ecology. And in spite of all we would be able to do, because we know techniques for decades, how to grow food without pesticides, without fertilizers, and more food and richer in micronutrients. We've been able to do so for ages now, and we're not doing that except in niche markets, in niche situations. We use pesticides, we use fertilizers, we create hundreds of new dead oceanic zones through the years, as it's been shown by the World Alliance of Concerned Scientists in recent paper. We're now facing a disaster that has been made evident in May 2019 by the global assessment of the UN panel of experts, the IPBES, International Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. We are now heading towards, by the mid of the century, a planet where only a minor 5% of all the surface of the planet will be devoid of excess impact of human intervention. We heading towards the increasing desertification, the loss of 1 in 4 species threatened with extinction, 1 in 8 species threatened with extinction within a couple of decades. We've seen We've seen amphibians survive all the 5 previous mass extinctions. They're now threatened. 40% of species are threatened. And about all, or nearly all, populations in places like the entire Europe, places like North America and some of Japan, the most so-called developed places, almost all populations of amphibians are disappearing, reducing. And while we have destroyed, since I was born in 1970, we reduced more than 60% vertebrates. Now we're still destroying a third of them. Still a third of those population of amphibians, fish, birds, mammalians, and so on, are still decreasing. So it's really time we regain control of a way of using resources that is more aligned with what the laws of ecology allow. Agroecology, for instance, mimic natures by not destroying the soil, not tilling, not using pesticides, keeping the soil covered at all times, and only keeping the wild plants checked by the use of natural mulch, like it happens in nature. And we able to use complexified system of crop growth with mixture of polycultures, avoiding the dreadful, appalling nonsense of monocultures. And we can produce in this way, we can produce even more food without destroying the planet. And this is one example in agroecology, which is my main field of action. But in everything we do, we can do it so as to be able to survive as a species without threatening the destruction of other species. So this is my first very vast brush of introduction to the subject.
Okay, Michael, great. Thank you. That is very, very interesting, somewhat frightening, terrifying, because you're talking about decades, right? And I wanted to just ask you, you mentioned that your colleagues no longer talk about loss of biodiversity. They are talking about biological annihilation. That's what you said, if I remember correctly. Could you tell us what the key or the main differences between those two concepts are?
Well, basically, of course, they're connected. It means that it's a degree further of gravity. If you look at research done since the late 1980s until a couple of years ago, in 27 years, in parks, in protected areas, in natural areas, I'm not talking about industrial areas, intensive agricultural areas, urban areas, in parks, in natural parks, from 76% to 82% of all flying insect biomass disappeared. If you look at another research published in October last year, following in a long time span, about the same time span as the previous research I quoted, arthropods, so insects and others, in forests and grasslands, we see 2/3 of biomass disappearing, more than 72% of abundance disappearing, and one species out of 3. So this is a disappearance of things. If you look at, if you have a map of Europe with color codes for percentage of amphibian populations that are being in decline, so they first decline, then they end up disappearing. If you look at 60 to 90% of all the population of amphibians throughout Europe are declining, you basically are looking into wiping out life. You're not looking about just loss of some species. So we often think about biodiversity loss when we look at the very charismatic mammalians. And this is already appalling because you have rhinos gone, tigers gone, elephants gone, etc. You have a lot of very charismatic mammalians gone. So we think of the panda, we think of the polar bear, we think of tigers. That's yeah, of course, that's important as well, and that's scaring as well. But we don't really think about insects. But insects are disappearing at a rate that is unprecedented and not very clear and not very easy to actually estimate on a global scale, but they are disappearing, wiped out. And without that, it's like a card castle. We are taking out cards and the castle still stands. We don't know how long it will stand. And sooner or later it will crash, and us with that.
Well, that's, as I mentioned, that's at least for me, somewhat terrifying. And you said that we usually talk about those charismatic species, those charismatic type of animals out there, which I guess are the ones that make more noise when they just are gone missing, right? When they are extinct, like the rhinos and all those type of animals. However, as you mentioned, the insects, they play a key role in our ecology, right? In our environment. And we certainly are not paying that much attention to them. As you mentioned, yeah, you are right. I guess it's within our probably our psychology that we tend to look to bigger things rather than smaller things, most of us. And which insects or which group of insects would you say that are the most important in our ecosystem, that if they just go missing, we are in a down road to a catastrophe or something?
Yeah, to be fair, all insects are important. What happens is some of them resist more, like some of them are, but some of the insects that disappear are pollinators. Pollinators are disappearing fast. There was another research a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago in the Netherlands on some kind of pollinating butterflies disappearing. Some of my colleagues are working on ecosystem services, and they're analyzing the services that are brought by pollinators to our crops. And they have assessed the decrease of pollinators, and so the deficit of pollinations in certain crops according to different areas. And if you take the Venice region, for instance, in Italy, because of the kind of crops grown there, they over 50 to 70% in pollination deficit, in deficit of pollinators compared to what the pressure are, the decline of natural pollinators. I'm not talking about domestic bees. I'm talking about wild bees, or also other kinds of wild pollinators. They are declining, and without them, apart from the fact that we would not have so much to eat left without those, because many of our crops, many of our food depend on pollinators, pollinators also play a key role in the trophic chains. So if you see, for instance, another impact of the stupid way we have to keep using insecticides, and we use the same amount of insecticides as decades ago, but we use increasingly toxic chemicals because arthropods develop resistance, and we need to use more effective insecticides if you use that model. And now what happens, these insecticides also destroy pollinators, but also affect the life in the water life in inland waters, are affected to an extent. There's some research that has been carried out in recent years, over 10 years, in lakes in Japan. 91% of fish had disappeared. 91% of fish they wiped out, and all that is for reasons that are not justified, because we master the art of agroecology. It's still so little developed and disseminated, but it's been decades, and some of it is very innovative. Some of it based itself also in traditional way of farming. And for instance, in Southeast Asia, you have complex systems where you don't grow rice in monoculture anymore. You grow rice in places where you also have fish, duck, and plants that fixate nitrogen in the air, so you don't need fertilizers. And if you only look at how much rice you produce in this complex system, because of how the system is resilient and rich in life, you go from 400 grams per square meter in a monoculture to over a kilogram, 2.5 times more, over a kilogram of rice. And in the complex system beside rice, you have proteins from fish and ducks without any pesticide. So this destruction we're causing is based on nonsense. In addition to being catastrophic and dramatic.
So it is simply amazing what you mentioned, the data that your colleagues and you are working on and collecting, just simply talking about in terms of pollinators, talking about how they have a, let's say, a 50% deficit, you mentioned, right? Between 50 and 70, talking about half of what they probably would used to be able to pollinize, and now with a growing population that well, it's about to hit I guess a mark where it's gonna be uh, for the planet, it's gonna be harder and harder to be able to sustain our rapid population growth, right? So that's significant. If you're talking about I mean, the pollinators having that percentage of deficit, that's gotta be something for us to worry about, right? So that's simply amazing. Giancarlo, I don't know if you wanna ask something or if you wanna add something up to that.
Okay, it's okay. You can go back. You can continue. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so for me, it's simply amazing what you are saying, and also because before we are right now in the Climate Social Forum, right? So the main word is climate, but you mentioned that we talk a lot about climate crisis, yeah, but we're not even talking about. I think you mentioned ecological crisis. Is that what you said? So
Yes,
what is the main difference, and what would be the importance of us to start talking about that crisis in particular?
Well, that crisis, when I say ecological crisis, I mean what I've just been explaining in brief. It's the crisis of the destruction of life on the planet. It's linked to the idea that we are in the midst of the sixth mass extinction. Now, climate is making this worse. It's difficult to estimate the effect of the climate on the ecological crisis, but it's been said in the literature between 16% or maybe 20 or 25%, depending on even regionally, it may change, of direct impact of climate change on biodiversity, on ecosystem services, on the ecological crisis. But some of what we do, basically what we need to look at it like the way we live is, and the way we farm and the way we take resources, our lifestyle, our Western rich nation lifestyle is destructive, and it's the disease. Now, out of this disease, the two major, most worrying symptoms are the climate crisis and ecological crisis. So when we speak only of the climate, and we say things like we fight climate change, we don't realize that this is a symptom. And maybe we don't realize that because we're so used in our Western style medicine to fight the symptom, instead of having an approach like, if you had an approach like in Ayurveda medicine or in the Chinese traditional medicine or in any kind of moralistic medicine, you would see that you have to look at health globally and not just destroy the symptom. Of course, you have to target the symptom as well if it's very dangerous. So you recover from the symptoms as well. But there's a ground root to the symptom of climate crisis and ecological crisis together, and many other issues, like the issues that in a couple of decades we'll have more plastic than fish in the ocean. That's also a result of our disease. And this disease requires profound transformation. And it's not just us activists that say so. It's the very top level scientists nominated by the governments within the framework of the United Nations. When you take the sister panel to the famous IPCC, talking about the climate, the sister panel I mentioned earlier, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the IPBES. This panel of experts has said very clearly last year, the objectives of sustainability can only be achieved by transformative changes in all we do, from economics, policy, etc., in all we do. And they assessed it and expressed it very carefully, lest we misunderstand what they mean. They were very clear. Transformative changes means a radical transformation of all economic, social, political, technical approaches to life, including paradigms and values. Basically, if we don't change everything from the ground, we cannot tackle the climate crisis, and we cannot tackle the biodiversity crisis. Now, the other important thing is that we need to speak of both, because there are some things that we need to do to address both, and some that are specific. Like, for instance, if you still consider that you can use pesticides, or you can even consider a less challenged aspect of agriculture today, using fertilizers. There's a dogma that one can use fertilizers. It just has to use it intelligently. Now, this is based on a mistake from the 1850s by chemists who didn't understand microbiology and thought that the soil needed to have inputs from the outside. We need to shift this paradigm, because it's not based on actual science. We now know macrobiology. We know how the soil functions in microbiological terms too. So we need to change everything. And some of the things we need to do are directly highlighted by the ecological crisis and less so by the climate crisis.
So it's basically a total restructuration, reformation of our systems. That's what you are mentioning that we need to do, right? So we can address sometimes both of the crises, both of the problems, but sometimes we would need specific measures and actions, right? And you mentioned that it's no longer activists, just like us, we're trying to be activists in this climate crisis. You are certainly ecological and climate activist, but also a researcher. And you mentioned that those of your colleagues and those top researchers are also just starting to notice and talk about it and collect data and try to publish and make it public. But what can we all do as activists, as researchers, as business people, and what can we do to try to fight back these two crises? And what are you guys doing? And how is the government and the administrations around the world responding to all of this?
Well, I know that we have just a minute left, so I'll be brief. Governments and administration are not doing enough at all. Whatever we've been doing until now is insufficient. So I steal the title of a book from dear Noam Chomsky. Only a rebellion, she said revolution, only a non-violent rebellion can save us. We need some movement of the size of Gandhi and Martin Luther King, mass civil disobedience, non-violent mass civil disobedience, to force government so that we can own back the power to make decisions, because the current system, based on short electoral cycles and powerful interests, lobbies, etc., it has proven itself incapable of taking the huge measures that are needed. Only if we own the measure, we can make it. So this is why Extinction Rebellion has three demands, and the third is the most important. We want governments to establish and be guided and be led by the decision of citizens' assemblies on the measures to take on climate and ecological justice. So basically, we need to mobilize masses to demand that the future is taken back in our hands, so that citizens, they can decide, listen to the science, listening to the stakeholders, listening to different views, deliberate it together with a proper professional facilitation that allows every single voice to be heard, and then decide together. That's the only way forward, in our opinion.
Okay, great suggestions. Thank you very much, Marco, for all this information. It's wide opening, and I really appreciate your participation in the Climate Social Forum. We ran out of time, so I guess we're gonna be seeing each other around in the coming days. If you don't mind, I'll try to connect in LinkedIn. I'll look for you so that we can be connected. And well, thank you again.
Thank you, Lenny.
I'll be ending the session, and I'll be very glad to connect with you and the rest of the people around here too. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Marco, and thank you, Lenny. So let's. I put the link to join in the chat. So join in.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Bye bye.